Authors Over 50, Writing in Life's Sweetest Third. Authors Over 50's weekly podcast celebrates writers and their journeys to publication. Writing after 50 is a whole story on its own, so let's skip to life's sweetest third and talk with authors about their journey from pen to publish. Welcome, I'm Julia Daly, your host, and I invite you to listen to interviews with writers who've achieved their goal of publishing a book just later in life. We've seen award lists for under 30 or under 40, but I've yet to see lists for those who've achieved a significant milestone of their own, launching a new career and publishing their first book after the age of 50. We will hear about these authors' inspirations, struggles, strategies, and the smell of that first book. These writers' journeys inspire me because I'm one of them. My guest today is a national award-winning writer and the author of 6 published mystery and suspense novels where the settings play as prominent a role as the engaging characters. Known for writing late into the night by the allure of flickering candlelight, my guest often weaves a subtle, unexpected, paranormal twist into her stories. When her husband is asked how he feels about his wife doing away with innocent people in her novels, he answers with a wink, "I sleep with one eye open." Welcome to Authors Over 50, Penny Goetjen.
Thank you, Julia. It's great to be here.
Penny, our opening question is always, so what took you so long to write your first book?
Well, I don't know that it was a matter of taking long. I think I really needed to live a little bit. I think if I had tried to write, get into writing mysteries and suspense at, my 20s, I'm not sure I would have had enough to draw from and, enough experiences to really be able to relate. So, but with everything else I had going on before age 50, it didn't even cross my mind to write a novel. Prior to, I went to school and majored in accounting because I needed a very practical major. I needed to have a job coming out of school. So, there were so many different majors I was thinking about, including parapsychology. But there are very few places you can go to actually major in that. But I thought of all kinds of interesting majors, but when it came down to it, I decided, 2 years in, I decided to select accounting and be practical. And I did have a job coming out, which is what I needed. So, but I've always loved to, paint and draw and write. I was always that kid in, English class that was thrilled when they would assign something written, as opposed to an oral report or something. The last thing I wanted to do was get up in front of the class. So I was thrilled. I was, fist pumping under the desk, that it was a writing assignment. So, so I've always loved to do all that creative stuff. And, but I did do the accounting route for a while. But as soon as I got out of school, though, I got right back into painting and drawing and the right side of my brain. So I've always been tapping into it. I guess I've been accessing both sides, but it took for when we have three grown children now, and it took to the point where, they could, they were kind of, more on their own. And of course I'm the night owl, so I would stay up late writing. But at the time I was just writing for the love of writing. I didn't even know it was going to be a book, till I got to the end of it. And I thought, it's kind of long, maybe it is, maybe it's long enough to be a book. And then I knew enough about the industry that I had to query publishers and agents and so forth. So I started the querying process, and it took me 3 years, but I finally did find a publisher for that first book that I honestly, when I set out writing, I just had this funny little story that was forming in my head, and I was just playing with it. And I had the setting, first, and I knew it was going to be a murder mystery, and I had characters that I was coming up with. But in my mind, it was just going to be a short story that it was just going to be for my eyes only. So it's actually very liberating writing that way, thinking that no one was ever gonna read it. But as it turned out, it did get published, so that was exciting. And of course, once it got published, then it just kind of opened the floodgates, and all these other stories just kind of bubbled to the surface, and I've been writing ever since.
Well, it sounds like you can work with both sides of your brain. I could diagram sentences, but I could not figure out the math formulas. So you can do both, it sounds like.
Out of necessity, I guess.
Well, you are quite prolific with 6 books now. What's your routine for turning out so many?
I found for me the best thing to do is to set a word count, so that if I'm, in that mode of getting a novel written, getting a manuscript, a rough draft put together, I set a word count per day or per week, or I have a deadline, so I just kind of do the math, as they say, and figure out how many words I have to do per week, and that's what works for me. It's some writers, they can just write a certain amount of time each day. I need a word count. I need to know, okay, and I usually go past it, but it's nice to have that and know that I've accomplished that, and I can feel even better because I went past the word count. So that's what works for me. And I work all different times of the day. It's when when the spirit moves me, so to speak, and could be late at night, could be middle of the afternoon. But my rule is, if I wake up, it could be 4 a.m, but if my eyes are open, then I have to come downstairs and get my computer out and start writing. And of course, I might need a nap later on in the afternoon, but I do it when it moves me to do it. But I have that word count to keep me in line. So
I had never used that method of word count until I tried NaNoWriMo, the National Novel Writing Month. And
yeah,
you had to write 1,667 words a day to make that goal of 50,000 in a month. And that's a lot.
it is a lot.
That's a lot. It kept me on track, but goodness gracious, that was quite the month.
Yeah, and you can't do that every month,
No, no.
because a lot of things have to go by the wayside and get sacrificed to reach that kind of a goal. So,
Yes.
but it does show you can do it.
Well, do you edit as you go along, or do you wait until you finish a number of words before you do any editing? That's one thing I found with NaNoWriMo is I had to get the words on paper and I could not edit like I normally do. Every few paragraphs, go back and edit again, or edit the chapter as soon as I'm finished.
Yeah, I try to keep myself from editing. I really try to focus on getting the story down. And I know, a lot of writers have trouble with that, because maybe there's this fear in the back of our minds that someone's going to come along and read the rough draft before we're ready for it to be seen. And I thought maybe that might be, in the back of my mind too. So now what I do when I sit down to write a rough draft, the first thing I write at the top of the page in bold letters, in capital letters too, is note, this is a rough draft. Any attempt to construe it as anything else will be met with dire consequences. And then I have a little smiley face. And it kind of gives me license to write poorly, just to get the story down. And then once I do, then I can go back and rewrite and reword and move sections around or whatever. But for me, I think, and I think a lot of authors, I think you just have to try to avoid, try to resist that editing, because that's part of what we do too. We want what we produce to be the best it can be. So we want to be editing. But I think if you can resist that, you tend to write more, and just give yourself permission to write poorly, and at least initially.
Well, I know that true crime is a hot item these days. Do any real people or real events inspire any of your characters or scenarios?
Oh, absolutely. I tend to, if I hear a news story or I hear news about, an acquaintance that, something tragic that's happened, I tend to, first I feel very, very sad for them, but I tend to do the what if question. I'll say, gee, what if that were me? What if I were in that situation? What would I be feeling right now? What would I be saying? What would I be thinking? So I think a lot of my inspiration does come from me asking myself those questions that, you know, what if I were in that person's shoes? And then it just, my imagination just goes from there to develop the story. But people are always inspiring me as well. I just people watching in an airport is so much fun, and I often I collect characters that way. In fact, in this my most recent book, there's a character, Millie, who's quite a character, and she's actually the combination of a couple people that I just met briefly, but each of them were so colorful that I decided to put the two together and create this just delightful, quirky character that is the protagonist's mother. The first person that I had bumped into was at a one of my book signings a few years ago, and she had just come in from out of the cold, and this was up in New England, and she had several layers on. So she stopped and she's peeling off one layer after another, and she took off her hat, and every layer she took off, she would toss over an arm, and then when she got done, she kind of looked down and she patted herself down, and then she looked over at me and noticed that I was just smiling and watching her. And she said, I have to be careful I don't take off too many layers. My daughter hates when I embarrass her in public. So we both got a chuckle out of it. But then after she walked away, I thought, oh, I've got to use that. So I jotted down notes on my phone, and so and then more recently, I saw a woman, an elderly woman, biking past our house in a very colorful outfit on a very colorful bike. And I thought, okay, I'm going to take that person and the person from the signing and put them together. And she turned out to be a real character. In fact, one of my advanced reviewers liked her so much, she said that Millie should have her own book the next time around. She needs her own story. So, but people are funny. We're all unique in our own ways, and it's just fun when I see someone that kind of is a little bit different. I'll just jot down some notes and maybe give them a name, but describe them, give them a little backstory, and then I collect them, and then when I need them, I insert them in my stories.
Well, tell us a little bit more about your publishing journey. Did you stay with the same publisher for all of your novels? Did you move around? Were there any challenges along the way there?
I did change after my first book. I learned a lot, going into the whole writing industry, publishing industry. I didn't know a lot about it, but the contract that I had with the first publisher really wasn't doing me any favors. It really was not a good situation. So I hired an attorney and got out of that contract and got my publishing rights back so that I could move on to another one, and have been happy ever since. So, I'm with a independent, indie publisher, which is working out very well. But I don't think I would do it any differently. I think I'm kind of a trial and error type of person. And so I'm okay with all the steps that I've taken up to this point. I've learned a tremendous amount, and I've learned from other authors and a lot of the organizations that I belong to, the Sisters in Crime, Mystery Writers of America. We get to do a lot of networking and learn from each other. And so I don't think I would have done it any differently. I've learned a lot, and I'm enjoying where I am right now, and I'm going to keep at it as long as I can.
Well, what about trial and error of publicity for each of these novels? Have you created some type of template that works for you?
Well, this time around, the one thing I did differently, which I'm so glad I did, was I hired a social media manager who was delightful. She was so talented and creative and really very organized, which I am not. So in the past I have tended to just, when the thought crossed my mind, I would post something, and I tried to be, frequent about it, but I wasn't very organized. And she kept me on task. She created these wonderful graphics and little videos, and of course she used terminology that was all new to me, and she taught me a lot because I was pretty familiar with pretty comfortable with Facebook, but not so much with Instagram and Twitter. But she taught me a lot about those two. And but she had me, had a schedule for me, had a calendar, and there were times where I'd kind of veer off the rails, and she'd just very gently put me back on and say, no problem, we'll circle back and get those another time. And so she was very good about keeping me on track. And I this time around I had many more people say, or comment that I had much more of a social media presence than I've ever had. So I think that was definitely money well spent, and she was delightful to work with. So I think I would definitely do that again and keep up with her, because she really, and of course she's much younger, much younger than I am. So, and I think you really need that youth, that energy, that objectiveness, really, on how to steer an advertising campaign. So it was. I'm so glad I did that this time around. That's probably the one thing I wish I had done prior to now. So,
Well, why don't you give us a brief synopsis of your newest book?
okay. Well, The Woman Underwater it's a contemporary suspense. It's a standalone, so you don't have to have read my previous books to enjoy this one. It's Victoria Sands is the protagonist. And when the story opens, her husband has been missing for almost 7 years, which is a long time. And he disappeared seemingly without a trace. No witnesses stepped forward. What few leads the police had, they went cold very quickly. They never even found his car. And at the time, he was a teacher at a private all-boys boarding school, a history teacher, and he went missing on a field trip with his students to New York City. So at this point, the people around Victoria, her good friends, even her mother, are trying to convince her it's time to move on. It's been a long time. Something must have happened, even though there's no evidence. Something had to have happened. He's not coming back. And she needs to just face reality for her own sake, but also the sake of their sons. And she needs to move on. But she refuses. She knows he's out there somewhere, and is convinced that he'll be back. And in fact, one of the reasons she's so certain is that ever since they were first married, she has been receiving the most beautiful coral-colored roses for her birthday. And even after he disappeared, she still received them. So she's convinced that he's out there somewhere, and that's his sign to her that he's okay and that he'll be back when it's safe to come back. Of course, the wrinkle in the story is that their son, Jameson, is now a senior at that academy. And the field trip that his father went missing on is coming up on the academic calendar, and he really wants to go.
Wow, that sounds great. Why don't you read a few paragraphs or a section for us to hear your tone and voice in the book?
Okay, I'd be happy to. This is in the second chapter, and Victoria has had some nightmares. She experiences nightmares throughout the book, and so we're kind of picking up where after she's just woken up from one. The recurring dream only went so far. Was there more for her to see? Would it be revealed if she could hang in there and stay with the dream? She always woke up as she plowed headfirst into the water. Did she lose her balance and fall in? Did someone push her? Then a more terrifying question crossed her mind. If she did stay asleep and see the dream to the end, would she never wake up? Balancing on the curved porcelain edge, she peeled off her nightgown and eased her legs up over the side and into the tub, the water swirling at her feet. She leaned into the shower, the beads of water stinging her face. Pulling away to snatch a breath, she leaned in again. She imagined she was under a waterfall on a tropical getaway, willing the nightmare away. But the images pressed to the forefront of her thoughts. Had the 7 years of feeling lost without Robert manifested itself in her dreams? Or was it more literal and a harbinger of things to come? Turning off the shower, she plucked a plush white towel from the hook next to the sink and blotted the quickly cooling water from her skin. By the time she slipped into her bathrobe, she felt a chill up her back again. Drawing the lingering, thick steam into her lungs and letting it out slowly, she envisioned the dream swirling down the drain along with the sudsy water. A clear mind, only positive thoughts, restful sleep for what was left of the night. She needed to think it into existence. Hitting the light switch and tossing her towel on the rack, she returned to bed. Vince's side was empty, and she could hear him sleeping soundly across the hall. Running a hand across the sheet where his body had been, it was already cold. Sliding over to his side, she grabbed the larger of his 2 pillows and pulled it close, taking in his scent. She lay awake for what seemed like hours, listening to his even, heavy breathing while replaying the dream in her head, the details of which were evaporating from her memory the longer her eyes were open.
That's lovely.
Thank you. Thank you.
How long on average does it take you to write each book?
If I'm in my writing mode and I'm sticking to my word counts, I can usually crank out the rough draft in anywhere from 4 to 5 months, something like that. But I have to stay focused to do that. But of course, the whole pandemic that really kind of threw things that kilter. Because up until then, I was doing one a year, so that kind of threw things off. But I think I'm back on track again, and back in my writing groove, and back in my happy place writing. And it's funny, when I'm in the middle of my current manuscript, the concept for the next book pops into my head, as if my brain is saying, okay, you're having fun with this one, but let's get it written, because there's another one on the back burner, type of thing, which is good. I've always had something fun to look forward to.
That's great. I wish I could be or have that clarity about the next book.
It'll come.
Do you ever Google yourself, or do you read reviews, and how do you deal with the bad ones or the good ones?
I don't Google myself. I'm not sure what I would find if I did. I do read reviews, and because I'm always interested in feedback. If after the first couple sentences I can tell it's not going to be a good review, I might back off, and if I'm not quite in the right state of mind to read it, and then just revisit it at another time and just take a look at it. But fortunately, the majority are positive reviews. So when I do get a negative one, it does sting, of course, because you put your heart and soul into every novel, and but we don't write for everybody. Like, my books are not for everybody, and perhaps the wrong person picked up the book. So I have to let it go. It doesn't feel very good, but I have to let it go and just realize that the books aren't for everybody, and there are enough people that do love them that that do review them. So I do read them for feedback, but I'm okay with them. We're all we can't be everything to everybody, and that's okay. I'm okay with that.
I agree. Do you ever have writer's block?
Well, knock on wood. No, I haven't actually. I never have, and I do tend to. I don't plot out my books ahead of time, so I just sit down and I read the last few pages that I wrote. So it kind of gets me back into where I left off, and then usually I'm off and running and writing, and I never have, which is nice. It's funny that you asked that question, because years ago I went to listen to Dan Brown speak, and it was in a college situation, and so the majority of the audience was students, and somebody was brave enough to ask him if he'd ever had writer's block, and he had a very interesting answer. He says that writer's block is a crutch, that it doesn't exist. It's just it's a writer's way of just not having to write. And then he said, just sit down and write something, write anything, write garbage, just write something, and then eventually you'll get into the right groove and be writing the stuff that you want to write. He says, but don't fall for that. There really isn't writer's block. Just write. So I thought that was an interesting perspective on the whole concept, because it is something that writers worry about. I think that is there going to come a time that I'm not going to have a story to write, and I just believe that I'm going to keep having, because there's so many things around me inspire me, like when I travel, or because my books are set in places that I've fallen in love with. So it's usually it's the setting first that inspires me, and then once I've fallen in love, then it's the story just kind of starts falling into place, and then the characters start to introduce themselves to me, and they pull the story along. So far I haven't been at a loss for words or for writing, and I hope it will continue.
Well, I think sometimes we use procrastination as writer's block. We just want to put off something, or sometimes I have nuggets of ideas. I make a notebook of ideas for the next book, but none of them step forward as fully developed ideas. So I just continue to look at them and think, sooner or later, one of these is going to really speak to me.
Yes, and one will, or a couple will. So you keep taking those notes, and at some point it will all start to gel, and you'll be off and running again.
Sure. Well, Penny, always our last interview question is, our writers over 50 are a unique set. Do you have advice for writers 50 and above?
Absolutely. First of all, go for it. I think, as you say, we're in a unique position. We've lived life. We've got a lot of experiences we can draw from. And so definitely go for it. And as I said earlier, give yourself permission to write ugly. Just get the story down, and then go back and rewrite, reread. And then when you've got it to the point where you think it's the best that you can make it, then hire a professional editor to work with you to get it to be the best it really can be. Because if you're going to submit to an agent or a publisher, you have one shot, and it has to be, it has to be the best that you got. And when I say a professional editor, I don't mean your next door neighbor who used to teach English, or a buddy of yours who edited the school newspaper in college. Spend the money, hire a professional editor, and really and listen to them. That's the other thing. That's the hard part too. They may not say what you want them to say, but they're going to say what you need to hear, and listen to them, because they're professionals, and they're really going to, get you to the next step and really make your manuscript something that you can be proud of and that you can submit it and have it be taken seriously.
Well, I love that we had such sage advice from a best-selling author of 6 books and counting. And so we just appreciate your time here today. And we're happy to say that you're now one of our authors over 50.
Oh, thank you very much, Julia. It was my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us today. Please look for Authors Over 50 every Thursday when we will have conversations with accomplished debut novelists over the age of 50. Please subscribe and share with a friend. And check out my own publication journey after 50 at www.juliadaily, that's D-A-I-L-Y, like dailynewspaper.com. Until next time, keep reading and writing. And remember, it's never too late to fulfill a dream in life's sweetest third.